Good evening. You're with the Mojo Story. I'm Barkha. The farmers' movement has been besieged by one controversial headline after the other. Whether it was what happened in Lakhimpur, where four farmers were crushed under the car of the Union Minister for Home's son, and the subsequent killings of three BJP workers that followed, or whether it was what happened with the gruesome murder of Lakbir Singh at the Singhu border. Now, a new controversy is the subject of our focus on the broadcast this evening. Yogendra Yadav, let's take a look at our developing story this evening. Yogendra Yadav, one of the most prominent leaders of the movement, and in fact, probably its most public face after Rakesh Tikait, has been suspended from the leadership of the movement for a period of 1 month. Why? Because he showed the compassion, empathy, and humanity to actually visit the home of Shubham Mishra, one of the BJP workers who was killed in the retaliatory violence that came from the mob after the killing of the four farmers in Lakhimpur. Now, this has created a storm of its own. What did Yogendra Yadav do wrong after all? In fact, should he not have paid a visit to the families of the BJP workers? Mr. Yadav has reacted to the controversy, and we'll hear from him in his own words how he looks at this development. But isn't his suspension taking away and diminishing the moral force, the moral argument at the center of the farmers' movement, which has always said it is about the rights of ordinary people? Let's go across now to our newsmaker, Yogendra Yadav, who's joining us on the program. Yogendra ji, I'm struck by an interview I did with you many, many years ago when you had then parted ways with Arvind Kejriwal. And you used a phrase, you said, this is like the Stalinist purge. Your reference was to the lack of tolerance for another point of view. Do you not think that in the punishing of Yogendra Yadav for simply showing humanity, this too is somewhat similar to a Stalinist purge? And let me just unmute it.
No,
Yeah, go ahead.
Barkha, I find that this is completely different. Different in the sense that there was a situation where one person was leading, dictating, taking decisions, ordering things, and there was indeed a purge. In this case, it is a collective leadership in a genuine collective sense of the term. And it is a movement where there is no single leader, no single directive. And what they have done is to suspend me for 1 month. And let me begin by saying that I happily accept that. I am glad to go by the collective decision that has been taken by this movement, because for me, the movement, its unity is above everything else. Now,
Hmm.
should thank you for recognizing what I did as a humanitarian gesture, which is indeed what it was. It was more than that. I would say there's a question of principle here, there's a question of policy, and there's a question of procedure. On principle, I think it is a basic cultural value of our civilization that you may have enmity with someone, you have adversaries, you may have enemies, you may not go to their shadi, their birthdays, or whatever. But when it comes to death, you go even to your adversary's home. This is our cultural value. Look at Mahabharata and what happened after sunset. Or go to Sikhism. I mean, there's such a beautiful tale in Sikhism about Bhai Kanhaiya, who was offering water to enemies who were wounded in the war. And
Hmm.
he was brought to Guru Gobind Singh as a complaint. And Guru Gobind Singh said, no, he's doing his duty. He's a true Sikh. So that is the principle that people like me follow, because we've been brought up in the Gandhi, Lohiya, Jayaprakash, Kishan Patnaik tradition. Clearly,
Mhm.
other people don't agree. There's a question
But
of policy. On policy, I do think that movements which have space for such humanitarian gestures do not get weakened, they get stronger. In the first instance, it looks like a sign of weakness, and I don't blame those who see it as weakness. But in the long run, these things actually strengthen it. Look at what Mahatma Gandhi did to our national movement. Many people must have in those days thought it was weakness. But Barkha, there's also a question of procedure. When you take a decision like this, is it procedurally correct? And I feel that on this, there was a lapse on my part, and I regret it. I should have at least spoken to, at least informed my colleagues in SKM. Now, I was doing it in my personal capacity. I was doing it as with my colleagues from Jai Kisan Andolan. I did not for a minute invoke Samyukta Kisan Morcha. But the fact is, when in the middle of a struggle, when you do something like this, it affects everyone else. And one of the things that I said in the Morcha yesterday was that, yes, procedurally, I think I should have consulted everyone. And I do feel sad and sorry that so many people got offended by what I did. Now, I clearly have not been able to explain my viewpoint to the
But
colleagues
what
that
is
I
it
work
that,
with
what is
in the
it,
movement.
but are you comfortable being in the helm of a movement that actually believes that visiting the devastated father of a BJP worker who should never have been killed in the way that he was, because there is a due process of law. Uh, what, your colleagues who think that you did something wrong, what would they have had you do instead?
About one thing, there's no one at the helm of affairs here. And the beauty of this movement is that ordinary farmers who are with their tractors and trolleys and tents, they are at the helm of affairs. And that is precisely what is holding this movement together. But more to the point, uh, I look, let's not think only of the Kisan movement, Barkha. Something has happened to our public culture. Our public culture in the first half of the 20th century, when we had Tagore write to Gandhi. Basically, what did Tagore say? Tagore said to Gandhi, nationalism is such a narrow creed. Can you imagine a leader saying something like this? What did Gandhi write to Tagore? Gandhi expressed such deep disagreements. So the culture of cultural, the culture of humanitarian gestures, a subtle kind of dialogue, an open, fruitful dialogue, is something which is disappearing from our entire public life. So I do not blame farmers' movement. I think this has happened all over the country. And I'm sincerely hoping, Barkha, that my suspension may serve one good purpose, which is to begin such a dialogue. I do think that my presumption that everyone would understand something like this has been proven wrong. Now I can blame others, or I can say no. Maybe I should work more. I should explain everyone. I should speak to my colleagues, and I do hope to begin a fruitful dialogue on this.
But do you not think, okay, let me first understand your position. What I understand is that you do not believe that to visit Shubham Mishra's family, and I think one of the things you wrote was that they were not at all hostile to you. They were in fact quite gentle. They were quite open. They were very civil. You do not believe that was a mistake. You believe it was a mistake to not have consulted the Sikh Kisan Morcha earlier. But do you really need to do consultation to show an expression of basic humanity?
Um, you got me right. On principle and policy, I have a different position. But on procedural point, I understand what my colleagues are saying and I submit to their authority. Uh, should I do that? Well, normally I don't. But when you are in the middle of a movement like this, then it is always good to listen to collective wisdom. If they had said, don't go, would I not have gone? Maybe not. I would have argued with them. Maybe I would have persuaded them. Maybe I would have fought with them. But probably it was good to have spoken to them. And I believe in collective wisdom. And for me, Barkha, this farmers' movement at this stage of history is far too critical for me to bring in questions that are about my individual preferences, my principles. Yes, I have my principles. Yes, I have not changed my principles. But I need to understand principles of others as well when we are working in a collectivity,
So
which
what
is
is
what
their
I have done.
principle?
That's
So
what
what
I
is their principle? That if a be, what is their principle? What do they say is
I
their
think what
principle?
happened is that the large number of my colleagues understood this to be a justification. They thought that by going to their place, I had actually endorsed what Shubham Mishra may have done, or Shubham Mishra's politics, or Shubham Mishra's action at that point. I think there is a subtle difference between endorsing something and just sharing grief. But that distinction, And all such distinction in our public life, Barkha, are being lost. I mean, you look at all these things across parties, across movements. Isn't it true that this is happening throughout our public culture? Something very sad is happening to our public culture. And instead of simply judging others, I think we should take responsibility to say, okay, I should probably speak to everyone, I should consult everyone, which is what I have decided to do.
Do you not think, though, that it's not about your individualism, it's about what does the farmers movement stand for? And if the movement is to stand for inclusiveness, for empathy, for democracy, then it has to honor certain principles. Now this suspension comes on the heels of something. I'm not connecting the two incidents, I'm just saying that this has also happened. And it comes on the heels of the very, very gruesome murder of a man called Lakhbir Singh, whose hand was chopped off by a group of Nihangs at the Singhu border on the so called charge of the desecration of the Granth Sahib. And this was just pure horror. And my colleagues traveled to Lakhbir Singh's village in Punjab, and his father basically had just one thing to say. He said, these people could make a video of my son's murder, but they couldn't offer any video proof of this desecration. Not that if the desecration had taken place, the murder would have been okay. I bring up Lakhbir Singh, Yogendra ji, because I just feel that pehle wo hua, now your suspension. Do you not believe that there is a diminishing of the moral force that was at the heart of this that was at the heart of this movement?
On the Lakbir Singh's murder, Barkha, I would again not mince my words. This is one of the most horrible things we have seen in recent times. A murder is a murder, but such brutal murder, and then making a video and publicizing it. I mean, what else do we criticize Taliban's for? This is that kind of act which no civil society can ever accept. And I want to draw your attention to two things. Number one, uh, the Samyukta Kisan Morcha on day one, within I think 4 hours of our getting to know that something like this has happened, we took out a press release which clearly condemned it, said police and administration we would cooperate with, and said there is no place for things of this kind. And yesterday, in fact, Samyukta Kisan Morcha took one further step in that meeting. It was decided that in any morcha of the SKM, there is no place for this kind of a group which has done something as gruesome as that. Number one. Number two, you would have noticed that the association of these Nihangs with Samyukta Kisan Morcha may or may not be in doubt, but their association with the BJP is not in doubt anymore. There are photographs. So we had a Deep Sidhu incident about which the Morcha was blamed. Second day, we had Deep Sidhu's photographs with Amit Shah, with Mr. Modi. Similarly, this time, Kisan Morcha, what do we see the next day? Next, we see photographs of the person who's, this Aman Singh Amna, who has been justifying these killings. This person is photographed with Narendra Tomar, and these are not old photographs. Just 2 months ago, this man is with Narendra Singh Tomar. He has photographed with another minister of the Union Cabinet, Union Council of Ministers. So, once you put all these things, I do not see the Nihang episode, sad, horrible, and gruesome as it is, casting a shadow on the Samyukta Kisan
But does the mere photographing of a minister, does the mere photographing, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you there, but does the mere photographing of the minister with the Nihangs point to the government having to take culpability for what happens at the protest site? Yogendra, how do you make that leap?
Number one, if Nihang sitting next to us makes Samyukta Kisan Morcha culpable, then the minister is not just having an ordinary photo. It's not, like you, someone standing on the street and someone comes in, that's a photo khichwa lijiye. I'm sure this must be happening to you all the time. That's not the kind of photograph. Here is a delegation. the minister is actually honoring this person. The minister is another minister is having breakfast with them. So these are not casual encounters. These are not things that the minister or anyone can escape from. And we now also have detailed information of what transpired in that meeting. Basically, there was a deal in which the minister, the BJP, had asked this person, this particular person who heads a small group of Nihangs, to condemn the Samyukta Kisan Morcha, to put allegations against Samyukta Kisan Morcha. So we know all that. There's enormous detail which is in the public domain now. I'm not saying all that makes for a foolproof legal case. All I'm saying is that the extent to which you can make Samyukta Kisan Morcha culpable, then we should also make the BJP culpable. Because after all, the Nihangs have never been part of any delegation of SKM. They are not part of our Kisan Sansad. They were not invited, and I can Barkha, when we went to the police for our Kisan discussion, where, why, how it would be held, and so on and so forth. We made it absolutely clear to police, and these were all top police officers of Delhi. We said, these Nihangs who are sitting outside, please, we don't take their responsibility. They are not under our discipline. They don't belong to us. And please give us a route that does not touch them. And all this happened, Barkha, about 4 months ago. So these are not some new things that we are bringing up. This has always been the case.
Yeah. Let me ask you in the end, though, there's this clip of you sitting by the side of, oops, I'm just going to put you on mute while I ask the question. There's this clip of you sitting by Mr. Rakesh Tikayat's side when at a press conference, and he's being interrogated by journalists on exactly the killing of these BJP workers. And Rakesh Tikayat says that their response was reactive, and he doesn't think of them as doshi. And that clip has gone quite viral. And we have the clip, but I'm sure you're familiar with it. So let me ask you a last question: were you comfortable with Rakesh Tikayat's formulation, or were you uncomfortable with it? And I ask this because though you've said there's no one leader, he seems to have emerged as this sort of face, as it were, um, uh, the prominent face, as it were, of this movement alongside a few others. Were you comfortable with what he said?
One, if Rakesh Tikayat has emerged as a prominent face, I would say he deserves it. After all, the movement was being butchered on 28th of January, when Rakesh Tikayat was principally involved in rescuing it. So there's no, why should anyone present his being a major face? And about this clipping, Barkha, all you need to do this is not the clipping, this is, I think, from one of the public meetings. But if you play that press conference clipping where Rakesh Tikayat ji said, "Ha, action, reaction, wali baat," this is what he said. All you need to do, Barkha, is to play that clip for another 2 minutes, because I actually responded there and then. And I'm absolutely surprised because BJP has been running this campaign. Look at Mr. Yadav sitting next to Rakesh Tikayat, endorsing what he said, etc., etc. And no one bothers to actually play the same clip for the next 1 minute. Because in that 1 minute, I immediately there and then clarified in the presence of all my 8 colleagues of coordination committee, because I thought the way Rakesh Tikayat had put it lent itself to a misunderstanding. So I immediately supplemented it. And what did I say? I said, death is a death is a death. It cannot be condoned, no matter what the color of your gum, whether it is green or saffron or whatever. Every death is sad. No killing can be justified, and anyone who's been killed must get justice. I said this in Delhi Press Club within 15 seconds of Rakesh Tikayat saying what he said, because I thought he was responding to a question. And what he said, that tiny clip could be misunderstood, which indeed it was. It was played out.
Yeah.
And I clarified there and it has been reported in newspapers that I clarified. So
But
obviously,
that would take
I do not.
Yeah, that would take me to my last question. That the fact that you had to step in to clarify that particular statement, the fact that you you felt that humanity asked that you must visit the families of those who had suffered on the other side of the trenches in Lakhimpur, who were, killed, also murdered in retaliatory violence, but still killed in retaliatory violence. And the fact that you've been punished today for an expression of humanity, does that not make you feel somewhat disillusioned about the spirit of the Kisan Morcha and those leading it?
Disillusion, no, Barkha. This movement is just far too big, not just in numbers, not just in volume, not just in historicity, but for the significance of what it holds out for this country. This movement is far too important for anyone to be disillusioned about it. And above all, as I say for the third time, this movement is being led from below by ordinary farmers. So I have no business to be disillusioned. Yes, I notice problems. Yes, I try to improve. Yes, I don't succeed all the time. But that's all right. This is how collective action is. And for someone to presume that I'm the storehouse of all the wisdom and all the ethics, that may not be correct. So I learn, I try and convince others. I don't succeed all the time. But I do hope, as I said, that my suspension, and these are trivial things, Barkha, जैसे कहते हैं ना, बड़े बड़े शहरों में छोटी छोटी बातें होती रहती हैं, बड़े बड़े मूवमेंट्स में ऐसी छोटी बातें होती रहती हैं. योगेंद्र यादव सस्पेंशन is one of those छोटी बातें, because
So you will
movement is
stay,
big.
you will return to the you will return to the movement after a month.
Returning, I'm very much there. The only ban for the next 1 month is that I should not address I should not share a stage, and I should not participate in the 9-member deliberations. So I'm very happy to be an ordinary worker of the movement. Yes, of course, I will continue. Yes, of course, I will put more energy than before, because Barkha, this movement is not just about farmers. This is at the heart of reclaiming our republic today. And
But do
I
you not
cannot
think there should have
let
been more tolerance? There should have been more tolerance for your point of view if it's about reclaiming the republic.
Well, that's something I think people like you should persuade everyone, including my colleagues, including the entire movement. But this is the dialogue, and I've not given up hopes. I look forward to this dialogue, and it would be presumptuous on my part to assume that the first day I say something, everyone should accept it. We are trying to recreate something of the spirit of the national movement in this country. It's not a one-day project. It's a long project, and people like me, and possibly you, should learn to be more patient.
Okay, we leave it there, Yogendra Yadav. I have to say, in the face of grave provocation, you do remain unflustered, and we will thank you there. Thank you so much, Yogendra Yadav, for talking to us. Pleasure as always, and thank you very much. And to our audience, see you tomorrow. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon